So this will be a pretty short video. Quinn Thomas, a YouTube user, recently asked in my 400 deck video about how I order parts. And I thought it was a really good question because sometimes you can get really confused on what parts you're ordering. He asked, or I'm assuming do you have any tips on ordering parts from John Deere online dealership, because I find it difficult to keep track of which hardware part number goes to what when it all arrives at dealership. Also ordering parts from the dealership, like rollers that go underneath the deck, and then realize they don't make the long hot dog size roller anymore, and then you have to buy 3 smaller rollers and slide them in a series. And basically, parts, right? So, and I don't have necessarily all the parts that, they're already on the deck here because I've already finished doing what I want to do right now in terms of rebuilding it. But I have the 2 new green idler pulleys, and then I have this idler pulley here, and all of that is fixed. But I do have a lot of the packaging left over. For instance, I have some random bags, but you get all these bags and parts and bearings and whatnot, and they just give it to you in this box, right? So what I typically do when I am making an order for John Deere, and hopefully you can see this, I am old school, and I will literally just copy, in this particular case, I did it by hand. I'm going to put it here on the hood of this 318. What I will do is oftentimes I will copy this image off of John Deere parts, and I do all this on a laptop or a desktop, either one. I don't do it on my phone. But I'll copy this over, and I'll either print it out of a PowerPoint or print a screen or something like that, take a screenshot of the screen. And then I'll use a highlighter, and I will go ahead and highlight the parts that I think I need. So in this case, 29, 5, 7, 11, 12, 13, 18, 23, 17, so on and so forth. And then I'll actually make my own parts list over here. So for instance, 5 is an idler, there's 1. So what I'll do next to that, so if we look over here at 5, it says 5, there's an idler, but it's a replaced part number. It comes with 2 parts, AM38171 and M44193. And so by doing this, I indicate that that is now 2 parts. So for the example that Quinn used, the example was the 3 rollers under the deck. So what you have to do is you'll just have to write ×3 or just make some notes. But basically what I'll do is I go through this whole list, all through here, make some notes to myself. This was a pretty simple one overall, nothing too complicated. And I'll go ahead and put the price here and everything. Sorry for the shadows from my hand. But I'll go ahead and put the price, and I'll make myself some notes. For instance, I didn't order the washers, which are 24H1309. And basically I just kind of run through everything, and then I'll make my order. I do most of my ordering through John Deere online. I pick it up at the dealership. They also are willing to ship it to me. But seeing how I drive by my dealership to and from work, it's really easy for me to pick it up as long as I leave work early enough. And these are just some of the parts that I ordered with this deck. And obviously, the more complex a rebuild becomes, the more sheets you'll have. For instance, if I'm working on, and I will do this for any machine that I'm working on. One of the great things about Deere is how available their parts lists are. And some people don't like the software, and I've been tempted to do an online video of the software, but about every time I think I'm going to do it, it changes. And so it's like, I don't want to make something that's going to be out of date that somebody just has to learn. Another question that Quinn had was using new hardware. So yes, I do use a lot of new hardware. For instance, in this particular case, I replaced the idlers. I used old hardware here, new hardware here. I used a new bolt there, and I used old hardware there. Now, why on earth did I use some new and some old? Basically, I make that decision based on experience. I know that in some cases, like the idler bolts, they typically are pretty good. And a lot of times I'll disassemble before I order anything. But a lot of times, like the bolts that hold on the spindles, they're almost always shot. they're rusted, I typically have to take them off with an angle grinder. And really new hardware, or I will clean it up. I will clean up all the hardware. So all of this hardware that I reused is actually cleaned up hardware. Like I'll reuse washers and stuff like that if I need to. But I typically try to use new hardware. For instance, if you look down here, and now these are just grade 5 bolts that I use to hold the gearbox back down on the deck. I mean, that's just stuff that I have on hand. You know, just stuff that I have on hand. And so really, I try to use as much new hardware as possible. Yes, that does add to the cost of the repair, but new hardware is so much easier to work with. You're not having to worry about, removing all the rust. You're not having to worry about chasing threads or anything along those lines. Lock nuts that will start slipping, anything along those lines, you don't have to worry about if you use new hardware. And, you know, a lot of times, so for instance, in this box right here, this hardware is actually for the deck. So this is for, well, obviously it's for the deck. That's a stupid statement. These are for the spindles. And so this is all the hardware that you would need for the spindles. And basically there's 8 of them here, and those 8 bolts would go to the 4 bolts on each spindle. And then I have the bearings that I have not replaced, and that'll be in an upcoming video. I'll explain a little bit of that. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense on how I order my parts. You know, everybody can do it a little bit differently, but I think this, for me, this system right here where I print it out, I write everything down, and sometimes I'll have 2 or 3, 4, 5 pages, depending on what I'm trying to do. I'll print it all out, write everything down, make some notes off here to the side, and that way, once I've picked up my box from the dealer, I'm not having to go back and look this part number up again or look up the diagrams or anything along those lines. I can just get to work, and I basically just kind of set this off to the side, and then when I'm done with it, I put it in a notebook, and I kind of just make some more notes on top of it on what it was, what project it was, stuff like that, and I keep moving forward. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. This is actually a little bit longer video than I intended. If you have questions, comments, tell me how you keep your parts straight. Maybe other people can learn, but that's how I do it on mine. So thanks for watching.